Recently, I got laid from a job, not because I was watching at work, but because the company was not doing well. I hate tariffs. Now, while I'm searching for a new job, I thought it might be a good idea to level up my skills. So I thought of learning a new programming language. The only programming languages I know are HTML and CSS. I don't know anymore, so let's do a Google search. Best programming languages to learn for noobs. Top 7 best programming languages to learn for beginners. We got HTML, CSS, Python, Java, JavaScript, C, Ruby. The only two languages I know from the list are Java and C. So I had to choose between two, so I went with Python. I've spent 2 days bench watching Brocode's Python tutorial and took some notes. With all this information overflowing in my brain, it was time to take it for a spin. Yeah, that's how fast information leaks from our brain. In programming, the best way to test your skills is by making projects. I went onto this website. They have this particular Python project that beginners can make and I can practice my skills with. Personally, I think it's a good idea to start with the description to get a sense of what you need to do in the project. So let's start from there. Task Tracker is a project used to track and manage your tasks. In this task, you will build a simple command line interface. Okay, let's skip that. The application should run from the command line, accept the user actions and inputs as arguments, and store the tasks in a JSON file. The user should be able to add, update, and delete tasks. Mark a task as in progress or done. List all tasks that are done. List all tasks that are not done. List all tasks that are in progress. Ooh, so seems like there's a bunch of stuff that I need to do here. Task properties. Each task should have the following properties. So each task should basically have an ID, description, status, created at, and updated at, which are going to be data and time. Ooh, getting started. Set up your development environment. Choose a programming language you're comfortable with. Python, obviously. Ensure you have a code editor or IDE installed. Visual Studio Code. Project initialization. Create a project directory for your task tracker CLI. So I've already initialized my project directory, which is CLI. Pi stands for Python. Actually, I don't like this output here. There's a command that you can use to turn this galore into a nice terminal. Here's how. Ooh, look at that. Professional visual code user. I don't know what that means. Okay, let's start by creating a new project file. I'm gonna name my project file CLI task.py and we can close the terminal. The project requirements are that I can't use any external libraries or frameworks to build this project, and I have to use the native file system module for the programming language to interact with JSON. Let's quickly do some imports. These are just 2 modules that we're gonna need, but I don't know how to explain that. Next, I'm going to create a task, and let's not give it any parameters just yet, because I think we will need a class to create the task properties. And the word properties suggests that we need a class. I could be wrong though. Let's create a main function that will have all the main code of our project. For now, I'm just gonna pass it. And at the end of our project, there's one more specific line that we need to write in order for this project to be working. I mean, this can work, and that is... What this line basically means is that if we're running this file, then call the main function, which will run the code that is inside the main function. And also I gotta fix this here. Okay, now that is correct. So looking at the requirements here, I need an add function, an update function, a delete function, and a list function, along with a mark function. And the list function takes all these arguments. Let's first write down all the functions we are gonna need, and then we'll build from there. It seems like whenever I run this program and add any task, it should output something like this. So let's try to add that. I've just created a simple while loop that asks the user for the input, print the input, and then breaks. Let's test it out. To run this file, I'm gonna type in Python followed by the name of the file. Okay, it didn't work. No such file or directory. But the file's there. Oh, seems like we need to save the file. Let's quickly join this task. Seems to be working. So I have made some progress, however, I've immediately hit a roadblock. You see, whenever I take the input from the user, I strip it to remove any white space. I look at the first 3 characters of the argument or the string to see if the user wants to add a task. Then I call my add task function, create a task variable, and I initialize task object, which I've also written some code in the class, but we will get to that in a moment. I then print the task ID and then print the task description. Okay, so far so good. In the task class, I've added a task counter to keep track of how many tasks are there in our program. Then I've defined init function, which is short for initialize, and then passed in self, which refers to this task description. I set the ID to be that of the task counter. This is a class variable so that it doesn't have to be confined within the initialize function, and it can be accessed by other functions that I might define in this class. And then I increment the task counter by 1. However, when I run this program, actually I'll show you. Add a task. So far, so good. The ID should be 1 because the task shouldn't begin with 0, and then it prints the description. If I add another task, the ID is still 1, and I don't want that. So I'm gonna try and fix that. Okay, turns out that the only thing I needed to do was replace self with the class itself, and that should be working. Same with the task counter. The reason why it was not incrementing by 1 was because I was adding it to self, but not the class. Yeah, pretty stupid, but I get what you mean. I've added a bunch of different code in my program, actually in my main function. Let's go over it. First, accept user input, strip it, and then I split it, check to see if the first argument, or the first, what do you call it? Oh yeah, element of the list in lowercase is equal to add. Call the add function, delete the first element, then I join the list, because if I don't join the list, I'll actually show you what it looks like. So I'm gonna comment this out. Actually, I'll comment this out as well. Let's just print the task and I'll show you what I mean. We're getting a list, and inside that list there are elements, but we don't want that. This is not user friendly. So what I did was first get rid of this element add by adding delete task 0, which means delete the element at index 0, which is add. Then I call the join method and pass in our task and reassign it to the task variable. Actually, I'll rerun my program here. Add this. Okay, why I did not add that? Oh, stupid. So now it should work. There we go. So we remove the command and then we print what is after the command. And then the next lines of code are just simple. I initialize the task. I call task class to initialize a task. I then print the task ID, the task description. We can get rid of that print statement. It's the next day. It turns out that there's a problem with my code here. Although I was able to create the function to add the task, instead of adding it to a class, I needed to add it to a JSON file. And now that I think about it, it's probably going to be much easier if I just first created the file and took it from there. Because if I tried to do it all the way after creating all the functions, it's probably going to be a nightmare. So my first approach was to create a task dictionary and then add the task dictionary to JSON file. If the file's already there, it just opens the file, append it to the file, basically meaning that it adds the task to the end of the file. There's a mistake with how this data is being added to the JSON file. So I did some Google research, and turns out that I need to first create a list, add the task to the list, and then write the list to the file. That's what I did. I created a new task. I initialized a file name for the file where... Okay, basically what I did is just I copy pasted the code. Yeah, that's what I did. So what I'm gonna do here is probably change all of this. Maybe not. I'll change all of this to something like this. So it checks the file, loads the data, and then writes the data to the file, and then writes that new data to the JSON file. Made some changes to the code. First, I tried to write the data to the file with this try block. If the file already exists, this will throw an error, and we need to catch that error. That's why accept is here. So this should work pretty much. Let's check if oh, it's back again. By the way, it's so annoying to type this every time I open my terminal. So if any of you watching know how to permanently fix all this glower to this nice dollar symbol, please let me know in the comments. Okay, so we don't have our tasks.json file, which means that this block of code will not throw an error. Let's see if we have the file, which we do. And there we go. We have our JSON file. Well, it's not the most accurate one. We're gonna fix that now. I'll spend a couple minutes trying to figure out how to initialize a task and turn it into a dictionary. That's too much for my brain, so I asked ChatGPT again. Turns out that I can define a new function and then return the dictionary as the result of that function. I'm taking this. Okay, I made some changes to the file, basically just copy pasted the code from here to here. And then I assigned a variable to our task file. I checked to see if the file exists. If it does, open the file in a read mode and load the tasks into a list. If it doesn't exist, then create the list. Then I create a new task based on this class. I then convert all of this to a dictionary. Then I print the dictionary, which should output something like this. Then I append the dictionary to our tasks list, and then I write the file. I hope it works. Oh, looks like it's working. Spent like what, 15 minutes on that thing? I'm glad it's working. Okay, now what? I'm just gonna quickly yoink all of that. Theoretically, it should work now. Woohoo! Look at that. ID 1, description this, status pending. Well, we're gonna change that, but it seems to be working. And if I check my JSON file, there it is. So my tasks have an ID, a description, and a status. Now I need to implement the created at and updated at functionality, for which I will need to import the date and time module. The initialize function is not gonna take any arguments for the time. I will create a new function using the property and the setter decorators. For now, I'm just gonna set the times for created at and update at to the current time. Okay, let's see if it works. And it did not. Updated at. Oh, I know what's missing. It should work now. God damn it. Type error. Object of type datetime is not JSON serializable. What the is not JSON serialized? Looking at this output, it seems like it's printing it as datetime and then the current time. I think this is a problem that it cannot serialize this data into a JSON object, and that's why it's giving us a type error. So let's quickly fix that. Adding this method should fix the issue because it's going to convert the time into a string format, and the format is going to be hours, minutes, and seconds. Okay, that seems to have worked. Let's tackle the issue of incrementing the ID of the newly added task. Probably need to look at the last task, its ID, and then add 1 to it. But the question is, how do I get the last task? Let's do some Googling. How do I get the last element of a list? So this is what he tried. Some list, -1, 5. Set the last element. Set the second last element. Some list. Let's get back. I'm gonna erase all of this. Since this is working, it seems like I would have to do all the calculation in a new line or in a different piece of code and then add the variable to my task. Basically what I'm doing is looking at the last task, its ID, typecasting it to an int, and then adding 1 to it, and then passing the new task ID to my new task. I hope this works. Oh well, what do we know? Attribute error. Dict object object has no attribute ID, so this does not seem to work. Oh, this is not how you access keys in a dictionary. This is how you access keys in a dictionary. So technically, this should work now. There we go. Now it's 2. Let's double check it. And yes, task 4, task 2.
What are you guys in here for? Same.
While I was distracted, I think I'm probably gonna be needing this code a lot. So let's create a new function. And instead of these 2 lines, just call the new function. Now all I have to do is just copy and paste this function's code into update task. I'm probably going to be checking for the file a lot as well, so I'm thinking of creating a function for that as well, so that I don't have to write all these lines of code and just call the function and it does the checking for me. It's not going to be taking any argument. I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, it's not gonna take any arguments, okay? So let's quickly yoink all of this code and paste it. Okay, I made a bunch of changes to the file, so let's see if it works. Okay, it seems to be working. Oh, hold on. This doesn't seem to be working. So what went wrong? Oh, I forgot to add a return value for this function. Let's run it one more time. Okay, this still seems to be not working. It does seem to be working inside of this file, but why is it not working here? Okay, it seems like we did not store the return value of this function in a variable, and that's why it wasn't working. Okay, it seems to be working. Now I just need to modify the update function so that it updates description and it updates the updated time automatically. After I check if the file exists, I access the task using the ID we want to update and set the description to be the new description, which is going to be, well, I should probably rename it to... I set it to description new. I then initialize a new variable which contains the time of the update, and then I set the update time to be the new time. Okay, I accidentally added a new task. Update, missing 1 required positional argument, ID. Seems like I didn't think ahead. Turns out, if I use the remove CMD function, it does remove the command that was used to invoke the function. It then joins everything and returns it back. But my update function is expecting a second argument of ID, which I'm going to use and access the tasks in our task list. This is not good. I didn't want to get rid of my remove function, so what I did was check if the first element is equal to add, which means that add function was the one that called the remove function. If it did, then I'm just gonna delete the first element. Anything else, I'm going to delete the first element and I'm going to delete the second element because the second element is going to be the ID, because the only function that doesn't need an ID is add. Every other function is going to need an ID, or that's what I hope. So let's see if it works now. Not a valid command. Type -h or help to display the list of available commands to use. Wait, what? Oh, update, not update, you idiot. Type error. Indices must be integers or slices, not str. Oh, so I need to convert this ID into an integer because right now it's a string, and strings cannot be used as indices in a list. Okay, no errors. But did it update though? Oh, never mind, it did not update. If it didn't update, then what did it do? It didn't give me any errors. Okay, after like a couple of minutes, I finally figured it out why my update function was acting weird. So if I pass in the value to the update function, for example, if I needed to update the task with ID 4, it was updating the description. However, it wasn't doing it the way I wanted it to do. I had the code written like this, which meant that, well, maybe not this. For now, so the code was, if the task at index 0 is add, then just delete the add. If it wasn't add, it means that the add function didn't call it. So I assumed I would need to delete the first and the second element, because the first element is going to be update and the second element is going to be the ID. And I needed to delete both of these in order to get to the description. Turns out that this was the mistake. As soon as I delete the first element, the ID that I passed becomes the first element, because I just deleted the first element, so the next element becomes the first element. So all I had to do was just delete the first element 2 times, join the description, and return the description. Oh, I'm so glad I finally figured it out. Update task 5. This is updated text. Okay, we don't need this, but it should have updated task 5. It didn't update it. Well, at least it's close. Okay, it's working now. All I had to do was subtract 1 from the ID, because when I load this file, it turns it into a Python list, and the index starts from 0. So whenever I tried to access the ID of a task, it would always go to the one above. Since the index starts from 0, I would have to subtract 1 to get to the ID of the task I want to update. I hope that makes sense. Oh, one more thing I completely forgot about. I need to set a status for my task. Right now, if I create a new task, it automatically puts it into pending, but we don't want that. We want it to be to do. While I was fixing the to-do status, I ran into another problem. It seems like when I tried to open the file and tried to load the file, if the file doesn't contain anything, it threw an error, and the error was JSON decode error. The obvious solution was try and catch that error, and if the error is caught, I just return an empty list. And also, the status is now set to do. So let's do deleting next, because it's gonna be the easiest. First, I check for the file, then I delete the task at given ID, and write a new task list to our file. It's only going to take one parameter because we're not adding or updating anything, but we're just simply deleting the task. And as soon as I give the ID to the task, it's gone. Oh, what do we know here? Oh, I forgot, when you load the task file, it automatically brings it to a list in Python, and the list indices are different. So all I have to do is close this in parentheses, subtract 1 from it. That should fix the issue. Boom, 1's gone. And we still have our functionality. Okay, before we begin any further, I know I did make some changes, but what I did essentially is that right now, if we run our program and I type in Control-C, we get this output, which is not very user-friendly, and it says keyboard interrupt. Control-C basically ends your program. I'm going to enclose my program into a try block and then accept any keyboard interrupts, and this is where our sys module comes in play. There's a handy method to gracefully exit out of your programs, which is literally called exit, and then you pass in a code, which is going to be your exit code. I'm also going to add a print statement, which will tell the user what happened in the program. I got so caught up trying to optimize my code that I yeeted out the previous file to the trash bin and created a whole new file. The overall structure of the new file is still the same. However, there are some additional changes that I made. For example, there's a new import for the requests module, which we will discuss later on. Then I still have the file name. Additionally, I also added the statuses list, which contains the valid statuses for the program. I still have my task class, which is the same as the last one. I still have my add function, but there are slight changes in this iteration of the code. I added a whole new function to get the description for the task we're trying to add. I will also explain the get description function later on, but for now, add task is still the same. We still have the delete function. I've also defined 2 new functions to be used in the delete function and some others as well we will talk about. Moving on to the list function, there are a couple changes that I made. For example, I defined a function which basically turns the list of the tasks that we want to see. I will show you the code implementation of the algorithm as well, but for now, I just store those sorted tasks in a variable. Then I just have some basic checks. I know we didn't define the mark function in the previous iteration, but this one is pretty straightforward. I use the get description function to get the new status. Then I use the get second element function to get the ID. Then I use the task IDs function to get the task IDs. Then I check for the file to get the tasks list. Then the first check is if the ID we provided is a valid ID or not. If it is not, then I just print that it's not a valid ID and I return. I don't think we need the return statement here, but I don't know. Let me know in the comments. If it is a valid ID, then we enter the loop, and then I check if the ID we provided matches the ID of the task we're looking at. And just before I make the changes, I check to see if the new status we provided is a valid status or not. If it is not, then I just print that the status we provided is not a valid status in the list. If it is a valid invalid status. Then I make the changes, I write it to the file, and I return. Update function. Same old story. Now that all the required functions are out of the way, here are some of the base functions that I used to generate some of the outputs that I did. First of all, we have our check function. I believe it's the same function we used in the last iteration, so I don't think I changed anything. Then we have the get description function. Now this function accepts two positional arguments. First is the arguments that we provide to our function, which is going to be what we type in the terminal. Second is the function, which is just there to help me identify which function actually called the get description function, so that I can modify the return value in a way that the function that called it can accept it. If everything goes right, this function should return the value we are seeking. Then I have my sort task function. It's basically just a sorting algorithm. Then I have my algorithm for getting task IDs. Then I have my get second element function. Then I also went ahead and created a help file function, which basically does as it sounds, because all it's going to do is display the help file. If the file doesn't exist, I use the request module to download the file. Yeah, that's basically it. That's my whole program. Now, how was the experience? I'll be very honest, that was brutal as f. I wasted so much time on my last file that I ended up just giving up. Yeah, I gave up midway. Can't imagine how tough it might be being a software developer or software engineer watching this video, but it was fun. It was enjoyable. I learned a couple things. Hopefully I did. With that, I'm never fucking touching this again.